The stars were dying, and Queen Selithra watched them fall one by one from the observation deck of her royal flagship, her crystalline skin reflecting the distant explosions. Like a mirror of grief and despair, the Velcari Empire had stood for 10,000 years. A civilization built on the power of the mind, on the ability to reach across the void and touch thoughts, to bend reality with pure psychic will. And now it crumbled before an enemy that cared nothing for such elegant powers. The devouring swarm had come from the dark spaces between galaxies, a tide of living ships and mindless hunger that consumed everything in its path. And against their trillion-linked consciousness, the proud telepaths of Velcari Prime found themselves helpless. Selithra turned from the viewport as her chief advisor entered the chamber, his blue crystalline form flickering with anxiety that she could feel pressing against her mind like cold water. "My queen," Admiral Verthal began, his telepathic voice echoing in her consciousness. "The outer colonies have fallen, and the swarm advances toward the core worlds at a speed we cannot match." She already knew this, had felt the death screams of millions echoing through the psychic web that connected all Velcari. But hearing it spoken aloud made the reality impossible to deny. What options remain to us? She asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. Verthal hesitated, and in that hesitation she read everything he was afraid to say. The desperate gamble, the humiliating alliance, the price that would cost her more than just political capital. "The humans have responded to our request," he finally admitted. "Earth's galactic coalition offers military aid, their ships, their soldiers, their weapons." Selithra felt a ripple of disgust pass through her. Not at Verthal, but at the situation itself. At the thought of begging help from the most primitive species to achieve interstellar travel. Humans were strange creatures, short-lived and fragile, possessing no psychic abilities whatsoever. Their minds completely closed to the cosmic energies that every other sentient species could touch. And the Velcari had long considered them barely worthy of notice. And what do they want in return? She demanded a permanent alliance. Verthal replied, "Sealed by marriage, they want you to take a human consort. A symbolic union between our peoples." The words struck her like a physical blow, and for a moment she could not breathe, could not think, could only stare at her advisor with something between horror and disbelief. "You cannot be serious," she whispered. "I wish I were not, my queen." But the human ambassador was quite clear. "This is their only condition, and without their help, our people will be extinct within 3 cycles. Selithra walked to her throne and sat heavily upon it, feeling the weight of 10,000 years of Velcari pride pressing down on her shoulders like chains to marry a human. A creature with no psychic presence, no ability to share thoughts or emotions, no way to truly connect with her on any meaningful level. It would be like bonding herself to an animal, to avoid wearing flesh. But what choice did she have when the alternative was watching her entire species devoured by the swarm? "Who is this human they wish me to wed?" she finally asked. "Commander Marcus Cole," Verthal answered. "A military officer of some distinction among his people, though by our standards he appears quite unremarkable. 42 of their years old, a veteran of several conflicts. No special abilities or notable achievements beyond competent service." Competent service, Selithra thought bitterly. She was to bind herself for eternity to a creature whose greatest accomplishment was being merely competent. "Bring him to me," she commanded. "I will see this human for myself before I agree to anything." The human arrived 2 days later aboard a transport shuttle that looked crude and primitive, next to the elegant crystalline vessels of the Velcari fleet. And Selithra watched his approach through the ship's sensors, trying to understand what made this species think they could stand against the swarm when her own people could not. Commander Marcus Cole walked into her throne room with a steady gait, his brown eyes taking in the glittering splendor of the Velcari court without any apparent awe or intimidation. And she found herself surprised by how calm he seemed. He was tall for a human, broad-shouldered and solid, with graying hair cut short and a face marked by age and experience. And when he stopped before her throne and offered a respectful bow, she felt absolutely nothing from him. It was the strangest sensation she had ever experienced. Reaching out with her mind and touching only emptiness, as if he simply did not exist on the psychic plane, as if there was a hole in reality where his consciousness should be. "Queen Selithra," he said, and his voice was surprisingly deep and calm. "I am honored to meet you, and I understand the sacrifice you are being asked to make." She blinked, caught off guard by his words, having expected arrogance or perhaps nervous deference, not this quiet acknowledgement of her position. "You understand nothing, human," she replied coldly. "You cannot understand. Your kind lacks the capacity." He did not flinch at her insult, did not show any anger or hurt, just nodded slowly, as if accepting her assessment without argument. "Perhaps you are right," he admitted. "But I understand duty, and I understand that both our peoples face extinction if we do not work together. Whatever you think of me personally does not change that reality." Selithra studied him for a long moment, searching for deception or hidden agenda, but found only that maddening emptiness, that void where his thoughts should be. "Very well," she said at last. "I accept the terms of the alliance. We will be bonded according to Velcari tradition, and you will serve as my consort for as long as this war lasts." "And after the war?" Marcus asked. "That depends entirely on whether we survive," she answered. The bonding ceremony took place 3 days later in the great temple of Velcari Prime, with thousands watching both in person and through the psychic network. And Selithra had never felt more alone than she did standing beside this silent, empty creature who was about to become her husband. The ritual required her to open her mind completely, to forge a link with her partner that would allow them to share thoughts and emotions across any distance. A bond that was supposed to be the most intimate connection two beings could share. She reached out with all her power, pouring her consciousness toward Marcus, seeking the spark of his mind to kindle the eternal flame of their union, and found nothing, no resistance, no rejection, just an absolute absence of anything to connect to. Like reaching for a hand in the darkness and grasping only air, the priests exchanged worried glances. The crowd murmured in confusion, and Selithra felt humiliation burning through her like fire as she realized what this meant. The bond could not form because there was nothing on the other side to bond with. She completed the ceremony anyway, speaking the ancient words and accepting the symbolic chains that marked their union. But inside she felt only cold despair. She had sold herself to avoid, married an empty shell, condemned herself to a loveless union with a creature who could never truly be. Her partner Marcus stood beside her through it all, calm and patient, and when it was over he leaned close and spoke softly so only she could hear. "I am sorry," he said. "I know this is not what you wanted, but I promise you I will do everything in my power to be worthy of the trust you have shown." She wanted to laugh at that, wanted to scream that he could never be worthy, that he was nothing but a necessary evil, a tool to save her people. Instead, she simply nodded and turned away, already planning to avoid him as much as possible while maintaining the appearance of a proper royal. Married, she had no idea that the empty man beside her carried secrets that would change everything she thought. She knew about power, about strength, and about what it truly meant to be human. The war was coming, and Marcus Cole was far more than he appeared to be. 3 weeks passed aboard the royal flagship, and Selithra did everything she could to forget that she had a husband at all. Marcus had been given quarters far from her own chambers, a deliberate insult that he accepted without complaint, and she filled her days with war councils and fleet preparations. Anything to avoid spending time with the hollow creature she had bonded herself to. The Velcari court treated him exactly as she expected, with barely concealed contempt and mockery that bordered on cruelty, and she did nothing to stop it, because part of her felt he deserved it simply for existing. The pet human, they called him behind his back, or sometimes to his face, laughing at his inability to hear their telepathic jokes, amused by his fumbling attempts to understand a society built entirely on mental communication. But Marcus never reacted to their abuse, never showed anger or frustration, just continued his daily routines with a patience that Selithra found increasingly disturbing. She began watching him through the ship's internal sensors, telling herself it was merely curiosity about this strange creature she had been forced to accept. And what she saw confused her more than she wanted to admit. He woke before anyone else on the ship, rising in the darkness of artificial night to exercise in his quarters, pushing his body through punishing routines that left him drenched in sweat and breathing hard. He studied constantly, absorbing everything he could find about Velcari history, culture, military tactics, and technology, learning their written language with a speed that surprised the scholars assigned to monitor him, and he watched. Always watching, those brown eyes missing nothing as he moved through the ship like a ghost, observing patterns and behaviors, and weaknesses that no one realized they were revealing. It was Admiral Varthel who first brought her attention to something. "Strange, my queen," he said during one of their private briefings. "I must report an anomaly regarding your consort. What has he done?" she asked, expecting to hear about some diplomatic incident or cultural offense. "Nothing improper," Varthel replied. "But he has been accessing our tactical databases, studying our weapon systems and fleet dispositions, and he has been doing so for hours every day since he arrived. Is that not to be expected?" Selithra asked. "He is supposedly here to help coordinate our military efforts." "Yes. But my queen, he's not merely reading the information. He's analyzing it. He has already identified 17 inefficiencies in our defensive formations and submitted detailed proposals to correct them." This surprised her enough that she actually looked up from her work. "Have you reviewed these proposals?" "I have," Varthel admitted, his mental voice tinged with something that might have been reluctant respect. "And they are sound. Better than sound, actually. Several of them show tactical insights that our own strategists missed." Selithra said nothing, but she found herself thinking about her husband in a new way. Still dismissive, but now curious as well. That curiosity turned to something else entirely. On the night of the assassination attempt, she was in her chambers preparing for sleep when she felt the death screams ripple through the psychic network. 2 of her guards cut down in the corridor outside, and then her door exploded inward. 3 figures rushed into the room. Velcari warriors wearing the insignia of a rival house that had long opposed her rule, their crystalline blades gleaming as they charged toward her. Thrana Selithra raised her hands to defend herself, summoning the psychic fire that was her birthright. But she knew she was too slow, knew the blades would reach her before her power could manifest. And then Marcus was there. She had not seen him enter, had not heard him approach. One moment the space was empty, and the next he stood between her and the assassins like he had materialized from thin air. The first attacker fell before he could even process what was happening. His arm twisted at an impossible angle, and his blade buried in his own throat by hands that moved faster than Selithra's eyes could follow. The second managed a single swing that Marcus simply was not there to receive, stepping aside with a motion so fluid it seemed like water flowing around a stone. And then his palm struck the assassin's chest with a sound like thunder, and the warrior flew backward into the wall hard enough to crack the crystal. The third assassin tried to run, and died with his neck broken before he had Taken 2 steps, the whole thing lasted perhaps 5 seconds. And when it was over, Marcus stood among the bodies, without even breathing hard. His expression calm and controlled as he checked each corpse to confirm they were dead. Zalithra stared at him, truly seeing him for the first time, and what she saw made her heart race with something that was not quite fear. How? She demanded. How did you do that? They were trained warriors. Psychic adepts who could read your movements before you made them. Marcus looked at her with those empty brown eyes and spoke quietly. They could not read what was not there to be read, he said. I have no psychic signature for them to sense. No intentions broadcast ahead of my actions. To them I was invisible until the moment I struck. But the speed, she pressed, the strength, that was not human. Humans are supposed to be slow and weak. By your standards, perhaps, Marcus admitted. But you have to understand where we come from, Queen Zalithra. Earth was not a gentle world that nurtured its children. It was a death world that tried to kill us every single day. He moved to secure the door while he spoke, checking the corridor for more threats with a professional efficiency that spoke of long experience. Every predator on our planet was faster than us, stronger than us, better armed with natural weapons. But we survived anyway because we learned to do one thing better than any other species in the galaxy. And what is that? She asked. We learned to never stop, he answered. To chase our prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. To take wounds that should kill us and keep fighting. To face certain death and refuse to accept it. We are not the strongest or the fastest. But we are the most stubborn creatures ever to walk under any sun. Zalithra sat slowly on the edge of her bed, processing this information, reevaluating everything she thought she knew about the man she had married. Why did you not tell me this before? She asked. Would you have believed me? Marcus countered. You were so certain that humans were inferior, so convinced that your psychic powers made you better than us. Anything I said would have been dismissed as primitive boasting. He was right, and she knew it. And the knowledge made her uncomfortable in ways she did not want to examine. Your guards will be here soon, Marcus said. Moving toward the door, I will give my report and return to my quarters. I suggest you increase your security. This was not a random attack. Wait. Zalithra called out before she could stop herself. You saved my life. Does that mean nothing to you? Marcus paused and looked back at her, and for just a moment she thought she saw something in those empty eyes. A warmth that his lack of psychic presence had hidden from her. It means everything, he said quietly. You are my wife, whatever you may think of that bond. I take it seriously. I will protect you with my life for as long as I draw breath. Then he was gone, leaving her alone with bodies and questions and a growing suspicion that she had made a terrible mistake in judging him so harshly. She did not sleep that night, instead lying in the darkness and thinking about persistence predators, about creatures who won not through superior power, but through sheer refusal to quit, and, for the first time since her wedding, she wondered if perhaps there was more to humans than she had ever imagined. The swarm was coming, and somehow the thought of facing it with Marcus Cole at her side no longer seemed quite so hopeless. The swarm's advance scouts reached the outer colonies on a day that Zalithra would remember for the rest of her life as the moment. Everything changed. She was in the war room when the first reports came in, surrounded by admirals and generals and the greatest psychic warriors her empire had ever produced. And she watched them all fall apart in a matter of minutes. Contact on the perimeter. The sensor officer screamed, his mental voice cracking with terror. Thousands of them. No, millions. The readings are off all our scales. The holographic display lit up with enemy signatures. Red dots spreading across the map like a plague of blood. And then the psychic assault hit them. Zalithra had trained her whole life to withstand mental attacks, had built shields around her consciousness that could deflect the most powerful psychic warriors in the galaxy. But nothing had prepared her for this. The swarm was not an army of individuals. It was one mind wearing billions of bodies. A chorus of hunger and destruction that sang with a voice loud enough to crack planets. And when that voice touched her shields, it felt like being buried alive under an ocean of screaming insects all around her. The Velcari crew collapsed, clutching their heads and crying out as the sheer volume of the swarm's thoughts overwhelmed their defenses. And even the strongest among them could barely function under the assault. Only Marcus remained standing. He moved through the chaos like a stone in a river, completely unaffected by the psychic attack that had crippled everyone else. And he reached Selithra just as her knees began to buckle. "Hold on to me," he said, wrapping an arm around her waist to keep her upright. "Focus on my voice. Let everything else fade away." His touch was strange, an anchor in a storm of madness. And she clung to him desperately while trying to rebuild her shattered shields. "The fleet," she gasped. "They are falling apart. The ships are losing coordination." "I know," Marcus replied, his voice calm despite the destruction unfolding around them. "Your people rely on psychic networks to communicate. When those networks are disrupted, your entire command structure collapses. What do we do?" She demanded, hating how weak she sounded, hating that she was depending on this human to save her. "Fall back to the secondary defensive line," Marcus ordered. And she realized with shock that he had already assumed command, issuing orders through the few communication systems that still functioned. All ships switched to manual control and electronic communication, abandoned psychic links until further notice. The surviving officers looked to Selithra for confirmation, and she forced herself to nod despite the pounding in her skull. Trusting Marcus because she had no other choice, the retreat was a disaster. But it could have been extinction, and when the fleet finally regrouped at the secondary line, they had lost 40% of their forces, but the survivors were still fighting. Selithra sat in the medical bay while healers worked on the psychic burns that scarred her mind. And Marcus sat beside her with a datapad, already analyzing what had happened and planning their next move. "This is impossible," Admiral Vertol said, his crystalline form dimmed with exhaustion and grief. "We cannot fight them. Every weapon we have requires psychic coordination to aim, to fire, to coordinate between ships. Without our mental abilities, we are blind and deaf." "Then you need new weapons," Marcus said. "Or rather, you need to use weapons that do not require psychic coordination at all." "Such weapons do not exist," Verthol protested. "They do," Marcus corrected. "Earth's coalition has been using them for centuries. Dumb missiles, kinetic rounds, chemical propellants. Technology that works through physics and engineering rather than mental power." Selithra looked up at her husband, seeing the wheels turning behind those empty eyes. And she asked the question that everyone was thinking, "Can your people stop the swarm?" Marcus was silent for a long moment before answering. "The coalition fleet is small," he admitted. "A few hundred ships against billions of swarm drones. We can hurt them, but we cannot stop them alone." "Then what hope do we have?" she asked. "There is another option," Marcus said slowly, "but it will require your trust. And it will require resources that your people have never shared with outsiders." He pulled up a schematic on his datapad, a device that looked unlike anything Selithra had ever seen. A complex arrangement of crystals and technology that seemed to pulse with strange energy. "For the past 3 weeks, I have been studying your psychic technology," Marcus explained, "trying to understand how it works and why it fails against the swarm. And I think I have found something." "You have been studying our most closely guarded secrets," Verthol accused. "Without permission, without oversight." "Yes," Marcus admitted without apology. "Because I knew you would never share them willingly. And because I suspected we would need every advantage when the swarm arrived." Selithra raised a hand to silence her admirals. Protest. Show me what you have found. She commanded. Marcus highlighted a section of the schematic that pulsed with an absence rather than energy. A void in the design where normal physics seemed to bend around nothing. Your scientists have always wondered why humans have no psychic abilities, he said. You assumed it was because we were primitive, underdeveloped, lacking the evolution that other species achieved. That is the accepted theory. Selithra confirmed. It is wrong, Marcus said. Humans are not lacking in psychic potential. We actively suppress it. Our minds generate a field that cancels out psychic energy, a natural defense mechanism that evolved because on Earth there were predators that hunted through mental abilities. He let that sink in before continuing. This device amplifies that field, he explained. It takes the natural null zone that surrounds every human mind and projects it outward, creating an area where psychic abilities simply do not function. A weapon against the swarm, Selithra breathed, understanding dawning in her mind. More than a weapon, Marcus agreed. The swarm's entire existence depends on its psychic network. Every drone is connected to the hive mind at all times, receiving commands and sharing sensory information. If we disrupt that connection, they lose coordination, Berthel finished, his earlier hostility forgotten in the face of this revelation. They become individuals instead of a collective. Exactly, Marcus nodded. And individuals can be defeated. Individuals can be confused and frightened and driven to flee. Selithra studied the schematic, her mind racing through the implications and possibilities. Can you build this device? She asked. I already have, Marcus replied. I finished the prototype last night, but it needs a power source. Something with enough psychic energy to fuel the amplification process. He looked at her with those empty eyes, and she realized what he was about to ask. The heart of Velcari, she said quietly, naming the ancient crystal that powered their civilization, the sacred relic that her people had protected for 10,000 years. I know what I'm asking, Marcus said. I know what that crystal means to your people, but without it the device cannot work. And without the device, we cannot stop the swarm. Selithra closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her crown pressing down on her. The responsibility of 1 billion lives resting on her decision. The heart was more than a power source. It was the soul of her civilization, the artifact that had elevated the Velcari from primitive telepaths to a galactic empire. And using it for this purpose might destroy it forever. But what good was a soul if everyone who believed in it was dead? Prepare the device, she commanded, opening her eyes and meeting her husband's gaze with determination that matched his own. You will have the heart of Velcari, and we will face the swarm together. Marcus nodded, and for just a moment his hand found hers, a brief touch of warm skin against cool crystal that said more than words ever could. The War Council dispersed to make preparations, and Selithra remained behind, looking out at the stars and wondering if this desperate gamble would save her people or doom them forever. Either way, she was glad that Marcus Cole stood beside her, this strange empty man who had proven himself more full of purpose than anyone she had ever known. The Battle of Velcari Prime began at dawn. Though in the endless night of space, dawn was merely a metaphor for the moment when hope and terror. Khalid Zilither stood on the bridge of her flagship, surrounded by the survivors of her once mighty fleet, and watched the swarm descend upon her homeworld like a tide of living darkness. There were so many of them that they blotted out the stars themselves. Billions upon billions of organisms linked together in a single vast intelligence, and their psychic presence pressed against her shields like the weight of a collapsing sun beside her. Marcus Cole stood at the control console of his null field device, the heart of Velcari pulsing with ancient power at its core, and his face was calm despite the impossible odds they faced. Coalition fleet reporting ready. the communication officer announced. And on the tactical display, a small wedge of human ships took position at the center of the formation, 200 vessels against billions. A pathetic force by any reasonable measure. But Salithra had learned to stop measuring humans by reasonable standards. All ships hold position until the device activates, Marcus ordered, his voice steady through the electronic communication systems they had been forced to adopt. When the field goes live, the swarm will lose cohesion. That is when we strike. And what about us? Admiral Verthal asked, will the field affect our own psychic abilities? Yes, Marcus admitted. Within the field's radius, all psychic activity will be suppressed. Velcari and swarm alike, but your ships can still fight using manual controls. Theirs cannot. It was a brutal trade, stripping his allies of their greatest strength in order to neutralize the enemies. But Salithra understood the logic and accepted it. May the ancestors guide us, Verthal muttered. The closest thing to a prayer that the Velcari acknowledged, the swarm closed to engagement range. And Salithra felt their collective hunger scraping against her consciousness like claws on glass. A trillion minds screaming for her death. Now, she commanded Marcus activated the device. The heart of Velcari blazed with light so bright that every screen on the bridge overloaded. And from that light, a wave of absolute silence expanded outward like a bubble of reality asserting itself. Against the madness when the wave touched Salithra, she gasped, feeling her psychic senses go dead for the first time in her life. The constant hum of connected minds that she had known since birth suddenly replaced by nothing but her own thoughts. It was terrifying and liberating all at once. Like being blind and seeing clearly for the first time. But the effect on the swarm was far more dramatic. The leading edge of the enemy formation simply stopped functioning. Drones that had been flying in perfect coordination suddenly tumbling out of control, crashing into each other or drifting aimlessly as the commands from the hive mind failed to reach. Then further back, the swarm tried to adapt, pulling away from the expanding null field. But their collective intelligence was too slow, too dependent on instant communication across billions of nodes. And the chaos spread faster than they could retreat. All ships engage. Salithra shouted, and the combined fleet surged forward into the confusion. Human ships led the assault, their crews unaffected by either the null field or the psychic storm outside it. And they tore into the disoriented swarm with weapons that required nothing but physics to kill. Missiles streaked across the void. Kinetic rounds punched through organic hulls. And where the elegant Velcari vessels had failed with their psychic lances, the crude human weapons succeeded with brutal efficiency. For one glorious hour, the tide of battle turned. The swarm reeling before an enemy it could not understand. An enemy that simply did not exist in the psychic realm, where all its strategies had been formed. And then the swarm queen made her move. Salithra felt it before she saw it. A pressure building against the null field like an ocean pressing against a dam. And she turned to Marcus with alarm blooming in her chest. Something is wrong, she said. The field is weakening. Marcus was already working at the console, sweat beading on his forehead. And when he looked up at her, his expression was grim. The queen is focusing her entire consciousness on breaking through, he explained. She's abandoning control of her drones to pour everything she has into this one attack. Can the device hold? Salithra demanded. The device can, Marcus replied. But the device needs a focus, a mind at its center to channel the null field. And right now that mind is mine. She understood then what he had not told her. That the device was not just a machine, but a weapon powered by his own consciousness. That his empty human mind was the lens through which the heart's power was focused. She is attacking you directly. Salithra breathed. A trillion minds against one, Marcus confirmed. And she could see the strain in his face now. The blood vessels standing out on his temples. The muscles in his jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. The Swarm Queen's assault was not just psychic pressure. It was a war of annihilation, an attempt to simply erase the tiny void that defied her. And Marcus stood at the center of that storm, refusing to break. Blood began to trickle from his nose, then from his eyes. And his hands shook as he fought to maintain control of the device while a god tried to crush his soul. "Let go," Selithra cried, grabbing his arm. "You will die if you keep fighting." "If I let go, we all die," Marcus replied through gritted teeth. "The field collapses, the swarm regains coordination, and your people become food for the hive." She could feel his agony through their fragile bond, the marriage link that had never fully formed. And for the first time, she experienced what it meant to be inside a human mind. It was not empty at all. What she had mistaken for void was actually something far more terrifying. A wall of pure will that the universe itself could not breach. A refusal so absolute that it bent reality around its edges. She saw his memories in flashes. The history of his species burned into his genes. Ice ages and plagues and predators and wars. Extinction events that should have ended humanity a dozen times over. And each time that stubborn species had looked death in the eye and said, "Not today," she saw Earth. A planet so hostile that every other intelligent species in the galaxy would have died there in a generation. And she saw humans thriving there, conquering there, loving and building and dreaming there despite everything the world threw at them. And she understood at last why the Swarm Queen could not break him. It was not because Marcus was strong. Though he was, it was because he carried within him the collected stubbornness of 1 billion generations. Every ancestor who had refused to surrender to a universe that wanted them dead. "We always survive," Marcus whispered, blood streaming down his face. "That is what we do. We take whatever the universe throws at us, and we survive it." The Swarm Queen screamed in frustration, a psychic howl that echoed across light years, and she redoubled her assault, pouring the full weight of her trillion-mind chorus into destroying this one defiant creature. Marcus fell to his knees, but did not let go of the console, his body breaking but his will unbroken, and the null field held. "You cannot win," Selithra told him desperately. "No one can withstand this, not forever." Marcus looked up at her with eyes that were nearly blind now, ruined by the pressure of the assault, and he smiled. "I do not need forever," he said. "I just need long enough for you to finish this." And then he showed her, through their bond, what he had noticed that she had missed. The Queen had committed everything to this attack, abandoned control of her swarm to focus solely on crushing Marcus. And in doing so, she had left herself vulnerable. The path to her command vessel was clear. "Go," Marcus urged. "Take a strike team to her ship. End this while I keep her distracted." "I believe in you, Selithra." "I always have." She wanted to stay, wanted to help him, wanted to do anything except leave him here dying while she fled to fight another battle. But she was a queen, and her people needed her to win. "Hold the line," she commanded, gripping his bloody hand one last time. "Hold it until I return." "For you," Marcus promised. "I will hold until the stars go dark." Selithra ran for the shuttle bay, gathering warriors as she went. And behind her, the human she had once considered worthless continued his impossible battle against 1 trillion screaming minds, alone and dying and absolutely refusing to quit. The Swarm Queen's vessel was a nightmare made flesh, a living ship that pulsed with organic rhythms and dripped with fluids that might have been blood or might have been something worse. Selithra carved her way through its corridors with a blade of crystalline fire, her warriors forming a wedge around her as they pushed deeper into the heart of the beast. And all around them, the ship itself screamed in agony as Marcus continued to hold the null field against impossible odds. The drones they encountered were confused and sluggish, their connection to the hive mind severed by the field, and the Velcari warriors cut them down without mercy. "The throne chamber is ahead," one of her scouts reported, and Salithra felt a surge of desperate hope. If they could reach the queen, if they could end her before Marcus finally broke, the swarm would collapse into chaos and the battle would be won, but she could feel her husband failing even from this distance, their fragile bond carrying echoes of his agony across the void. And she knew they were running out of time. Move faster, she commanded, abandoning caution for speed, leading her warriors in a desperate charge through the final corridors. The throne chamber doors burst open before her assault, and Salithra beheld the Swarm Queen for the first time. She had expected a monster, a creature of nightmare proportions. But instead she found something almost beautiful in its horrors. The queen was massive, a towering figure of chitin and flesh that seemed to merge with the walls of her chamber. Countless tendrils extending from her body into the organic machinery that controlled her fleet, and her eyes were like galaxies, swirling with the light of 1,000,000,000,000 stolen souls. But those eyes were unfocused now, turned inward. All her attention concentrated on the distant battle she was losing against one stubborn human mind. "You think you have won?" The queen spoke, her voice echoing through both sound and thought. "I have consumed civilizations beyond counting. I have swallowed stars and drunk the light of nebulae. Your species is nothing but food waiting to be harvested. And yet here I stand," Salithra replied, raising her blade, "in your throne room, while you waste all your strength trying to break one single human." The queen's attention finally shifted to her, and Salithra felt the weight of that ancient intelligence pressing against her shields. But it was only a fraction of what it should have been. The rest still locked in futile combat with Marcus. "He cannot hold forever," the queen hissed. "I can feel him cracking, feel his mind beginning to tear. Soon he will break, and I will consume everything he is." "You do not understand humans at all," Salithra said. And she smiled despite her terror. "They do not break. They did not break when their own planet tried to kill them for 1,000,000 years. They did not break when every predator in the galaxy should have driven them extinct. They will not break now." She launched herself at the queen before the ancient creature could respond, her blade blazing with all the psychic power she could muster. And her warriors followed her into the final battle. The fight was brutal and desperate, the queen's remaining strength still formidable, even with most of her consciousness engaged elsewhere. And Salithra took wounds that would have killed her if she had allowed herself to feel them. But she thought of Marcus, dying on the bridge of her flagship while holding back the endless night. And she found strength she had never known she possessed. Her blade pierced the queen's primary cortex, and the ancient monster screamed. It was not just a sound, but a psychic eruption that shattered what remained of her connection to the swarm. Billions of drones suddenly cut loose from the hive mind, and across the battlefield, the enemy dissolved into chaos. Salithra drove her blade deeper, pouring her will into the wound, and she spoke the final words that the queen would ever hear. "You wanted to know what makes humans dangerous?" she asked. "It is not their weapons or their ships or their technology. It is the fact that they make everyone around them believe that the impossible is possible." The queen died, and with her death, the swarm died as well, not physically but spiritually, becoming nothing more than mindless beasts that the combined fleet hunted down and destroyed without resistance. As Ahirs collapsed among the corpses, her body broken and her mind exhausted, but alive. Alive because one human had refused to let her die. "Get me back to the flagship," she ordered her surviving warriors. Now, they found Marcus in the medical bay. Or what remained of him, he was alive, barely. But the cost of his defiance was written across his body in scars that would never fully heal. His eyes had burned out from the psychic feedback, leaving him blind, and the neural damage had paralyzed much of his left side. And the healers said that he might never walk again without assistance. But when Salithra entered the room, when she took his remaining good hand in hers and pressed her forehead to his, he smiled. "Did we win?" he asked, "We won," she confirmed, and she was crying now. The first tears she had shed since childhood. "Because of you, we won." "Good," Marcus sighed. "That is good." The Velcari Empire and the Human Coalition signed a true alliance 3 weeks later. Not the desperate pact of convenience that had begun this journey, but a genuine union of equals. Built on mutual respect and shared sacrifice, the treaty was called the Coal Accords, named for the human who had taught an entire galaxy what it meant to never surrender. Seelither kept her husband at her side, not as a political tool, but as a true consort, the partner she had never believed a human could be. And she made sure that every Velcari understood why. He is not powerful, despite being blind to psychic forces. She told her people, he is powerful because of it. He cannot be broken by what he cannot see, and he will never, ever stop. The word human entered the Velcari language with a new meaning after that. Not a description of a primitive species, but a concept, an ideal. Something between a blessing and a warning. To be human meant to endure, to face the impossible and refuse to accept defeat, to carry the weight of worlds on shoulders that should have broken, but somehow never did in the years that followed. Seelither and Marcus ruled together, guiding their peoples through the reconstruction and into a new era of cooperation that neither had imagined possible. Marcus regained some of his mobility through alien medicine and human stubbornness, learning to walk again through sheer determination. And though his eyes never healed, he claimed he did not need them. "I can feel everything I need through our bond," he told Seelither. And she realized that the marriage link that had once felt so empty now hummed with warmth and connection. They had children eventually, hybrid offspring that carried the best of both species. And those children grew up knowing that their heritage was not a burden, but a gift. On the anniversary of the Battle of Velcari Prime, Seelither stood with her husband on the observation deck of their flagship, looking out at the stars they had saved together. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Agreeing to marry a queen who despised you, fighting a war that nearly killed you, giving up everything for a people who treated you like an animal?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, his scarred face thoughtful. And then he turned toward her with that smile she had come to love. "I would do it all again," he said. "Every moment, every wound, every sacrifice. Because it led me here, to you, to a universe where humans and Velcari stand together instead of apart." He reached out and found her hand with the ease of long practice. "Besides," he added, "this is what humans do. We find something worth fighting for, and then we never stop fighting for it. I found you, Seelither, and I will never stop." She kissed him then, under the light of a billion stars that shone because a human had refused to let them go dark. And she understood at last the truth that the galaxy was only beginning to learn humanity was not a species to be feared or pitied or dismissed. They were a promise, a reminder that no matter how dark the universe became, there would always be someone willing to stand